Hello and welcome to the 5th installment of my Pokémon Generation 3 ROM hacking series. The focus of this tutorial is to demonstrate how to edit existing animations and assign new animations to particular tiles. To do this, we will be introducing a program called Animation Editor by Luho, a retired member of the ROM hacking community. This video will be broken down to the following segments. How do I navigate through Animation Editor? How do I edit existing animations? And how can I assign brand new animations to certain tiles? Following these segments will be an application demonstration. In this final part, we will be creating and inserting an animation sequence for some custom tiles. This window will be displayed on the instantiation of Animation Editor. Let's load a ROM so we can view the game's animation sequences. If this is the first time your ROM has been loaded into Animation Editor, you won't be able to do anything until you insert a new routine into your ROM. It's not important to us at this point what this even means, but we still need to know how to properly insert it. Click the Insert Routine button and a new window should pop up. Make sure the Bytes to Search For box shows the values FF instead of 00. The amount of bytes that this routine requires is shown to us. Click the OK button. Some offsets should be shown to you. Click the first one and click the Repoint button. This should make it so that we can properly view and edit animations. We now need to select the tile sets whose animations we wish to examine. Tileset 0 is the nature tileset and has lots of animated tiles, so let's just stick with that one. Click Load Animations. The animations shown may be different depending on which game you're hacking, but the mechanics of what's going on are the same across all Gen 3 games. The first tile shown is the flower tile, so we'll switch to the correct palette in the tile editing section. You'll notice that it's also possible to edit tiles in Animation Editor, but we're not going to mess with that since it's much more modular and cleaner to edit tiles externally in my opinion. If we increase the display size of the flower to ×4, it'll be easier to see what's going on. We can also change how many 8x8 tiles are shown to us in each row and column with the minus and plus buttons. Since the flower is most recognizable in a 16x16 pattern, we'll stick with the default view. We can also click on the distinct flower tiles to view them individually. To best explain how things work here, click the Play Animation button. The flower will begin blowing in the wind. While this is going on, take a look at the animation step slider. Every time the flower changes frames, the animation step value increases. It then resets after it hits a value of 3, which indicates that there are 4 steps to this animation, since the values start from 0 instead of 1. Each animation step stems from a separate image, so when we begin inserting our own, we'll have to craft a set of image files instead of just one. This can be very time consuming, but worth it in the end. Leave the animation running and, in the Animation Options section, change the speed to something other than the original speed. You'll see that this changes how quickly the animation rolls over to its next step. Typically, tiles like waterfalls have very high speeds, and tiles like flowers have lower speeds. It all depends on personal preference, really. Moving on, the steps amount tells us how many frames there are to be loaded in the animation. Looking at the animation step slider again, we can see that it repeats the values 0, 1, 2, and 3, so there are indeed 4 steps to this animation sequence. The animation slot just tells us which animation this is within the tile set. The only requirements for this value is that it must be unique. You can't have 2 animations in the same tile set that have the same slot value. It's safe and logical to match the animation slot value with the animation number, just to keep things organized. The start tile tells us exactly which tile begins the animation in the tile set. But what does the value 508 physically correspond to? If we open an Outdoorsy Maps in Advanced Map, and open the block editor, we can hover the cursor over the very first flower tile to see its value in the tile set. This value is displayed to us in hexadecimal format, so before using it in Animation Editor, simply plug it into a calculator and convert it to decimal form. This gives us 508, which is the same value that we used in the start tile box. The final option to discuss is the tile amount value. This tells Animation Editor how many tiles starting from the start tile to include in our animation. The value here is 4 since, if we have a look at the original tile set, there are 4 flower tiles. You may have been wondering why the flower is laid out in an 8x32 fashion instead of a more recognizable 16x16 fashion. This is because all tiles that you want to have an animation assigned to must be laid out one after the other. Animation Editor doesn't know how to skip around in the tile set, so it'll just go in order from the start tile that you plug in. We can see this relationship even more if we have a glance at some of the water tiles. That's all we're going to talk about here. It's a lot to remember, but after we insert a couple sequences, it'll be super simple, I promise. At the end of the last tutorial, I talked about how replacing the existing tiles that have animations assigned to them wouldn't actually change the look of the tiles when viewed in-game. Some of these tiles include flowers and ocean water. We're going to go over how to replace these animations so that when we view these tiles in-game, they will indeed look different than they originally looked. For this example, we'll be replacing Fire Red's flower tiles. In order to do this, you'll need to find some custom flower tiles on the internet or craft your own. I'll be using the flowers that are on screen right now. To begin, we'll want to do the same thing we always do when inserting new tiles, that is, recolor them to match the loaded palette. I'm going to speed all of this up since we already went over it in the previous tutorial. If you recall back to Animation Editor, when we click on Play Animation, each animation step displays a slightly different version of these flowers in order to simulate the effect of them blowing in the wind. You can probably guess that we're going to have to create some unique versions of our own flowers to display this effect as well. When you're finished recoloring, save your image as a 24-bit bitmap. To create the additional versions, simply copy and paste your new flower tiles into 3 separate bitmap image files. As you can see on screen, I have 3 distinct images, each containing the custom flower. We're going to have to edit 2 of these flowers slightly in order to simulate that movement effect. There's not really much to say about this step, so I'll let you watch how it's done for a few seconds. The flower now has 3 different versions. Each of these images is slightly different than the others. Open Animation Editor once again. Before we're able to replace the old animation, we need to be able to load a palette file along with our bitmap files into Animation Editor. How do we get our hands on a palette file, you ask? Simply load the palette you used in Animation Editor and click Save Image. You'll notice that not only did it save an image to your computer, but it also saved the image's palette. This palette file is exactly what we need, so you can get rid of that random image you just saved. Each of our flower bitmap files need their own palette files. This means that each version of our flower needs to have its own corresponding palette file, which needs to be saved under the same name. So if your flowers are named f1.bmp, f2.bmp, and f3.bmp, you'll need to copy and paste 3 of those palette files and save them as f1.pal, f2.pal, and f3.pal. Otherwise, Animation Editor won't associate your palette files with the bitmap file. In Animation Editor, go to the first animation step of the flower animation and click Load Image. Load the first version of your custom flower. You should see that it has taken the place of the old flower. If you traverse to the other animation steps, you'll notice that they still consist of the old flowers, so we'll have to load our new flowers into those slots as well. You might be wondering what to do with the 4th animation step, seeing as how we only created 3 versions of our own flower. Did we make a mistake? Should we go back and make another version? No, definitely not. If we take a closer look at the last animation step image, you should notice that it is exactly identical to the second animation step image. This is to make sure that the flower has a smooth transition between all of its different frames. If we didn't have this final step, the flower would make a noticeably large jump from its 3rd position back to its original position, which wouldn't look very smooth. So we can just load the second version of our flower when it comes to this 4th frame. If we click play animation, we can watch our new and improved flower animation sequence. We don't even have to change any properties or values in the animation options section since this isn't a totally new tile. We're just overwriting what was already there. Hit the Save Animations button. You may be prompted to repoint some data. After repointing, everything should be saved and ready for viewing. Taking a look at the flower in game, we can see that it has indeed been replaced along with its animation. Let's move on to assigning brand new animations to certain tiles. Last tutorial we inserted a lamppost into the game. It may look nice on its own, but it's a bit disappointing that something known for changing states during nighttime isn't able to change in our game. Therefore, I'm going to use this tile as our example. As you can see, I've already drawn up each of the different versions of my lamppost for this animation sequence. I have 3 different bitmap files here, so you can naturally assume that I'll end up with 4 animation steps to make sure things look smooth throughout. These lampposts have already been recolored and their respective palette files have already been saved. So far, I've done nothing new from what we did when we replaced the flower. Since my lamppost was inserted into tileset 1 instead of tileset 0, that is, it was inserted into the Little Root Town specific tileset, we will have to change the tileset number value to 1 instead of 0. If we hit the Load Animations button, the program will tell us that there are no animations specific to this tileset. That makes sense since, if we look at Little Root's tiles in Advanced Map, we can see that none of these tiles have their own unique animations. They're just static graphics. Thus, it looks like we're going to have to add a new animation to this tile set. Click the Add button. A new animation sequence has been created for us. All of its properties are currently set to their default values, so let's go through and change them. I'll be sticking with the speed of 16 since from experience I know it looks okay. For this sequence we'll have 4 animation steps since we have 3 different versions of our lamppost. Since this is the first animation specific to this tile set, we'll keep the animation slot at 0. We need to figure out what the start tile value will be. Checking in Advanced Map, we can see that the glowy part of the lamppost starts at tile number 2A0. In decimal format, this value is 672. So we'll make the start tile value 672. Next is the tile amount. Since we have 4 8x8 tiles that are going to be animated, our tile amount is 4. That's all we have to do in this section. Click Apply Changes. Moving forward from here is pretty much the exact same as before. Simply load each of your bitmaps to their respective animation steps. When you're done, click Save Animations, repoint whatever needs repointing, and close Animation Editor. Viewing it in-game, it's clear that we've created something completely awesome. Not only have we inserted a tidy looking lamppost, but we've also won the hearts of our audience with a pretty flashing animation. Doesn't get much better than that when it comes to graphics hacking. That's everything I wanted to cover in this tutorial. Using the information we've learned, we will create and insert an animation sequence for some custom tiles. Now that we're stuck in the inevitable time lapse, I want to talk about one thing: what I plan to do next. So far I've gone over lots of graphics hacking concepts. I've tried my best to make sure each video builds onto the previous in a way. Things have been getting more and more in-depth as the tutorials have progressed, and we've basically just hit the cream of the crop of concepts that deal with tiles. Because of this, I want to transition from graphics to scripting very soon. We won't be completely abandoning graphics, mind you, since there's still a lot of necessary things to cover like custom trainer sprites and world map editing. But I do want to start getting into scripting events more. I think I'm going to do one more graphics video, then move on. We're about at the end of inserting this animation sequence. Everything that went into making this has been taught to you through this tutorial. Hopefully you all learned something valuable from this, and if you have any questions, please feel free to ask either at PokeCommunity or right here in my video's comment section. Thank you so much for being my audience, and I'll be back in the 6th installment of this series.